What is land acknowledgement?
Those of us that are continuing our oral history are blessed. What we shared, that was told from way back.
We were part of the ecosystem. We were not masters of it.
You know, after we grow up from our biological mothers, the earth becomes our caregiver. Everything that we need is there.
We were raised to believe that everything has a spirit, and that everything around us is alive and has a purpose.
The spirit of the land and our spirit. You can't separate land and people.
In Treaty 7 territory, I'm accepted, I'm something, and I'm with my people.
We honor our ancestors by acknowledging Treaty 7 territory. We acknowledge the Treaty 7 nations, the Piikani First Nation, the Siksika First Nation, the Kainai First Nation, the Stoney Nakoda First Nations, and the Tsuut'ina First Nation. We acknowledge the ancestral territory of the Siksikaitsitapi, the Blackfoot Confederacy, and the home of Métis Region number 3.
That's wonderful. We also acknowledge that Contemporary Calgary is just adjacent to the Bow River, and that we are in Calgary, which is also known as Mokhinstis, the Blackfoot name meaning elbow, for the convergence of the Bow and the Elbow River, just east of where we are right now. Thanks again for being here tonight with all of us, and please indulge me for a moment as I thank the people who made the Everywhere We Are exhibition possible. I'll ask you to hold your applause until the end, where I'll expect a thunderous applause, so get ready. First to our friend Ken Bradley, who's here with us tonight, who really made this exhibition possible. The beautiful work in your collection inspired so many people in this community. Everywhere We Are was a 2-part exhibition in collaboration and partnership with the University of Calgary, Nickel Galleries, and Contemporary Calgary. I think it's fair to say that this has been a project of passion and love, and it's been such a wonderful moment to celebrate these important institutions in our community and to make many new friends. Everywhere We Are is presented by Peter and Jan Tertzakian, was generously supported by Chubb Insurance and Lloyd Sad Novacord. I'd like to also acknowledge our exhibition benefactors, Michael and Renee Timms, exhibition patrons Sharon Martins, Karen Bradford and Jason Gralowski, Aaron Thrall and Peter Johnston. And of course, as always, we thank the Alberta Foundation for the Arts, the Calgary Arts Development, Canada Council for the Arts, the City of Calgary, and the Rosa Foundation. Please join me in thanking these people and organizations that make tonight possible.
I'm excited to soon welcome our guest, Dr. Alexander Nagel, to the stage. But before we do so, I would like to introduce Dr. Anuradha Gobin, Associate Professor of Art and Art History at the University of Calgary. And I learned just tonight at the back that one of our employees, Aliyah, was an engineering student, and that Dr. Gobin was very influential in having her change to be an art history major. So thank you, Dr. Gobin, a small world indeed. Dr. Gobin specializes in early modern visual culture of Northern Europe and its colonies in the Atlantic world. Please welcome Dr. Gobin.
Thank you. So as mentioned, my name is Anuradha Gobin, and I'm Associate Professor of Art History at the University of Calgary. On behalf of the University of Calgary and the Nickel Galleries in particular, I'm delighted to be here to introduce our esteemed speaker. Dr. Alexander Nagel is a Craig Hugh Smyth Professor at the Institute of Fine Arts at New York University. He is a prolific scholar who has received numerous awards and prestigious fellowships, which are just too many to list in detail here tonight. I will, though, highlight a few that I feel and I think exemplify his illustrious career to date. His first solo authored book, Michelangelo and the Reform of Art, was awarded the prize for the best book in Renaissance studies by the Renaissance Society of America. A subsequent book entitled The Controversy of Renaissance Art received the Charles Rufus Maury Book Award, which is the top book prize from the College Art Association. In addition to these important contributions to the fields of Renaissance studies and art history, Dr. Nagel's work has also complicated traditional disciplinary periodizations to illuminate the multiple temporalities of art. His books, Anachronic Renaissance and Medieval Modern Art Out of Time, have been instrumental in demonstrating networks of exchange across place and time. And on a personal note, these interventions have been particularly impactful on my own approaches to teaching and writing. Professor Nagel has edited and co-edited multiple volumes of essays, most recently on the afterlife of Ravenna and Renaissance metapainting. He's held fellowships and conducted research at institutions across the world, including the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, the National Gallery of Art in Washington, and the Harvard Center for Renaissance Studies at the idyllic Villa I Tatti in Florence. In addition to these quite impressive scholarly achievements, Dr. Nagel's work has had significant impact beyond academia, particularly in the realms of art production and curation. He has written for the London Review of Books, Times Literary Supplement, Brooklyn Rail, and Cabinet Magazine, the latter two of which he also serves as a consultant editor. Dr. Nagel's talk today is entitled Possible Worlds and is drawn from his current research that considers the implications of Europeans' conflation of America and Asia during the 16th century. And I think it feels particularly fitting for us to consider this process of defining new worlds in this space that we're gathered in today, the Dome in Contemporary Calgary. As many people probably know, this site previously served as the Centennial Planetarium. So it's a space that's dedicated to ideas of exploration and discovery. So without further ado, I think on to the main event of the evening. I ask you to please join me in welcoming Dr. Alexander Nagel.
Thank you, Anu, for that very kind introduction. I feel like I have many thank yous to give already because I've been here a couple of days and I've seen so much, both here at Contemporary Calgary, today at Nickel Galleries, and have been so impressed and inspired by not only the work that I've seen in the galleries, but the work that goes into presenting them to the public. So thank you. This is my first outing to do something like this since the before times. And maybe for many of you, that's also the case. I feel very welcomed and supported in doing this. I also have learned in another sign of the times that I'm speaking to the people in this domed room, but also to people who are attending from different places live. And also, because that's the way we do it now, I'm speaking to any number of future audience members who might link to this lecture online. So I'll try to speak in a frequency that can be understood by all three audiences. Could we have the PowerPoint up? Thank you. This featherwork mosaic shield was acquired by the Spanish captain Hernán Cortés about 500 years ago, just a little over 500 years ago, after he laid siege to the Aztec capital Tenochtitlan. That was in the spring and summer of 1521. Soon thereafter, many objects like this made their way over to Europe, this one making it to Stuttgart sometime in the 16th century. We can identify the turning central motif as Xikalcoyuqui, twisted gourd, a widespread motif in indigenous cultures of what we now call Mesoamerica, that has been variously interpreted, and the interpretations are somewhat controversial, in relation to lightning, serpent deities, rain, waves, movement between heaven and earth, and also as a figure of temporal cycles. The Aztec-controlled provinces sent pieces like this to Tenochtitlan, a form of tribute delivered to the capital. So these ceremonial shields functioned as trophies of sorts within the Aztec Empire, even before they became trophies for Europeans. Now, in the case of this shield, the combination of the Xikalcoyuqui with the motif of concentric circles at the bottom is unusual. This is not a known shield type of the sort used as tribute within the Aztec Empire. So some scholars, including Alessandro Russo, have raised the question whether we are to think of this not as a relic of pre-contact, pre-Cortés culture, but instead possibly as a product of the contact itself. Could it have been a new work made for Cortés, made for export, if you will? Europeans who first saw this shield in the 1520s and for decades after would have known nothing of its original functions and would have relied on their own impression of the striking forms, a stepped spiral formation at top, target-like design of concentric circles at bottom. The concentric circle motif would have looked pretty familiar to Europeans. It was their main model of the universe. This is a typical diagram from a very popular cosmographic treatise showing the Earth at the center of an onion-like cosmos, a still Earth surrounded by the orbiting planets and ultimately by the crystalline sphere of the stars. So we have the Earth at the center with its latitudes indicating climatic zones. And then we have, moving outwards from that center, wavy waters. I hope you can see this. The cloudy puffs of air, the tongue-like flames of fire. So earth, water, air, fire, the four elements long considered to be the primary building blocks of the sphere down here under the moon, the sublunar sphere we inhabit. And then moving above that atmosphere, I'm not going to turn around because it's obviously affecting the mic. Moving above our atmosphere, we have the planets that an early user of this book nicely wrote out in their orbits: Mercury, Venus, the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. They didn't know Uranus and Neptune. And then the crystalline sphere of the stars, and then the zodiac. And beyond that, the emptiness of the white paper, which is God, the prime mover. You can see to the left of the diagram, it says primum mobile dicitur. They call it the prime mover. Here's a somewhat later diagram of the same idea. So we have the unmoving prime mover outside of the system, and the only other unmoving thing in this scheme is Earth, at the center of the cosmos. We are the universe's baby, according to this scheme. We receive the showering attention and influences of the higher powers. So that's one possible world. Over the next century, that world scheme was challenged by the Copernican model, where the Earth is one of many bodies moving in space around the sun. You can see the Earth still shown rather large above, with the moon in its orbit around the Earth, but the sun in the middle. And that's something like what we have in the mosaic, the floor mosaic made by Helena Hadala, which is outside of this space, where we have the Earth in the center of various, or the Earth not in the center, but orbiting amidst other various movements. It's amazing how the color scheme looks so similar to the 17th century print. And yet it's not so easy to shake off geocentrism. Does not a planetarium originally, like this, reinforce a sense that we are here and the universe is arrayed around us for our contemplation? This building was built in 1967, as everyone here knows, to celebrate the centennial of Confederation, even though, in fact, in 1867, Confederation did not yet include Alberta, which joined in the early years of the 20th century. So this building really celebrates the idea of a nation's centennial, and it stabilizes other ideas, like the notion that this is a planet called Earth, and there is our solar system and galaxy and neighboring galaxies, and that we know where we stand in the universe, which we can project around us on this dome in a place called Calgary, named after another place called Calgary across the ocean, and that we are in a nation called Canada. These abstractions supported by buildings and visualizations and commemorations cover, and in some ways cover up, the less comfortable and less defined realities that we call it Earth only because it is made up of Earth, and that we don't know why it is the only planet that we know of that sustains life, or that Canada, like the United States, is a recent conceptual and legal construction invented to stabilize claims on a land, claims that were made more fragile, not less fragile, by the decimation of the people and civilizations that had arisen here over the millennia that preceded the arrival of the Europeans. People and civilizations whose cosmology told them they were inhabitants of Turtle Island, a dynamic and rather accurate conception of a land that was originally underwater and then arose and grew and became fertile, a sort of terrarium that sustains us and needs sustaining. I'm going to continue to deliver a bit of Canadian content. First, Canada was a province, and then that name was given to the whole Dominion when what was once the province of Canada became Ontario and Quebec. That eastern province was named Canada back in our period, the one that we're going to be spending most of our time in this evening, back in 1535, by the French explorer Jacques Cartier, who learned from the Haudenosaunee chief Donnacona, or perhaps from one of his sons, that the word Kanata meant village or town. And then Cartier extended the idea to name a region along the Great River, later called the St. Lawrence. So here is a post-Cartier map, made very soon after his voyages. It's a south-oriented map, so we see north at the bottom, you see Labrador on the left, and then further south, meaning up from there, is the characteristic shape of Newfoundland off the coast. And inland, you see Cartier with some of his men, and on the north side of the Great River, that is below, you can see in small red letters the small region of Canada and then 2 more times in ever larger letters, Canada, Canada. On his second voyage, he made a list of words in the Iroquois language, and here is the actual list in his hand, and I've circled where he gives this word. Ils appellent une ville Canada. Just above it says, ils appellent leurs fèves, they call their beans, sae. So they call a village or town Canada. So he said Canada. The Huron Iroquois word is Kanata. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And so what we have is really an extrapolation from Kanata village to province and region, and that really describes a logic of settlement, not Cartier's settlement, which was barely there. Kanata is an indigenous term, and he's using it to describe the fact that there were many villages and towns. In his report of 1535, Cartier speaks of, and I quote, the immense numbers of people there, and of their kindness and peacefulness, and of the richness of the great river, St. Lawrence, the largest river known to have been seen. So his Canada refers to the existing villages and towns, the ones that were already there, inhabited by these immense numbers of people. Yet, in its application, as it was extended into ever larger regions, the name Canada, eventually given to the whole British Dominion, arose in denial, of course, of the reality that Kanata names and that Cartier himself avowed, that this was and had for a very long time been an immensely populated territory, a land of villages, in fact, a civilization made up of a mosaic of communities that knew a great deal about how to live as part of an ecosystem here. And yet, at the same time, every time the word Canada is pronounced, we are producing and hearing that word Kanata over and over, whether we know it or wish it or not, a reverberation of that land of villages that Cartier saw and recognized and interacted with. And that means it's also possible now, in a time of increasing global anxiety about our own self-imposed destruction, to listen to that word Canada and let it become unfamiliar again, to receive what it is saying as something that we barely understand, except as a series of questions. What was this land of villages? What were their stories? How did the villages hold together? How were they connected with each other? How did this vast network and civilization make up a way of being in the world? And to ask those questions is to come up again and again against the extreme difficulty of beginning to answer any of them, given the overwhelming destruction that has occurred. So denial is not just negligence or a failing to acknowledge. Denial is necessarily a destructive impulse. It's compelled to annihilate the evidence of what it is denying. I hope you can see this image. This is from a book by a mestizo historian of the city of Tlaxcala in Mexico. Diego de Camargo was the son of one of Cortes's generals who married an indigenous woman of the ruling class of Tlaxcala. So this son was raised Christian, and in his adulthood, he served as an ambassador of his province to the Spanish crown. The drawing, one of many, it's a fascinating book, shows the burning of garments, books, and religious paraphernalia by Franciscan friars in Mexico. And it is officially a document celebrating these acts as part of a supposedly successful campaign of Christianization. And yet look at the way the drawing preserves the life of these burgeoning Mexica objects and images, Even as they are supposedly being burned, they seem more alive than the small figures below. For me, this drawing is intentionally or not performing a denial of denial, putting the act and what it represses before us. The act was very effective. Of the thousands and thousands of ceremonial and historical manuscripts produced by Mesoamerican cultures, now only 15 Mesoamerican manuscripts from the period before Cortes exist in the world. The burning of the Library of Alexandria was an accident by all accounts. This was not. And that is why we really don't know enough about what Xikalkoyukwi means. So this is a history that implicates all of us, and in particular, of course, those who practice my métier, so the people of my tribe, the tellers and makers of history, a tribe that exists both outside and inside universities and includes artists who also often work with historical materials in their own ways. It may sound like what I'm doing is talking about the past, but in fact, we're always talking about how the past has made it down to us and not made it down to us, how this history of memory and cancellation has gotten us here, which is to say that we're always talking about the future. And sometimes it happens that the things we study, like this feather mosaic shield, are also talking about the future. The shield's pattern, a pale spiral formation against a red ground with a sphere at the bottom, is not very far from that of the so-called Madonna of the Rose by the Italian artist Parmigianino, made a few years later in 1529-30. It may be that they're not very far apart in meaning as well, and I think we'll get to that a little bit later. Generally, the painting has been understood in terms of European frameworks. It's an interesting moment in the career of the artist. It's an example of mannerism. It's a bid for the patronage of a pope. It's part of the history of collecting, etc. I'm going to approach it this evening in terms of reciprocal anthropology. We look at the shield as a work that traversed worlds, and we can do the same with the European painting. Much more certainly, we know this painting is, in fact, a response to the encounter with new worlds. It was brought into being by the imagining of possible worlds arising, as I'm now going to try to bring out through a practice of slow looking that I've been developing in collaboration with my students. So, fair warning, we'll be looking at this painting for the rest of the time together here this evening. The Dresden Madonna is a perfumed, sticky, and disorienting scene of sexual innuendo set in an environment of turbulent fabric. So wrote Tom Hollert in a recent and actually very interesting essay. And I'm going to unpack this sentence for a moment. Perfumed, I would agree with that. Sticky, I would say more like slick in the sense of smooth, gliding, utterly frictionless. Disorienting, definitely. More on that later. Sexual innuendo, I'm just not sure what he means. It seems to fall short of what's going on here. The Greek word cosmos, as Parmigianino and his contemporaries well knew, means ornament, beautiful pattern or design. We have a weak trace of that sense of the word in our word cosmetic. And according to most thought of the period, what brings together the cosmos out of chaos, what brings beauty out of darkness, life out of non-life, is the attractive force of love. So maybe that's what he's picking up on. Christ's hand threads knowingly under the Virgin's left arm to offer her a rose. He offers, and she turns, or you might say she furls. She seems to leave the realm of willful action, coming under a force that gathers her around it, like a corolla curling around a flower's reproductive organs. Or if you prefer, she's like a twisted gourd. If bodies become flower-like forms or turning vessels counts as sexual for you, then good on you. You're a happy person. There is certainly a bit of teasing here to pick up on innuendo. The child places his snow-white hand on the earthly globe, his mouth just curling into a smile, while looking out with a gaze that seems to say that he knows exactly what he's doing, and that we might come to know, too, maybe soon. The painting's now called the Madonna of the Rose, but for the century or so after it was made, it was called a Madonna with the Christ child resting his hand on a globe of the earth, or a Madonna and child with a mappa mundi, so with an atlas of the earth. So let's call it like they did, the Madonna of the earthly globe. We see the Iberian Peninsula at the orb's left edge, with Africa below it and Asia extending across to the right. Now, I've done some digging and also asked many of the experts in cartography of the period, and no one has been able to identify a specific source for this globe, yet it seems clear that Parmigianino studied a specimen, and probably more than one, pretty carefully. So if anyone's a cartography buff in the room or listening online, we're looking for a map or globe that shows those 3 parallel blocky islands in the Baltic Sea, an unusual feature of this globe. But however fascinating the detail of the globe, it needs to be understood within the workings of the painting as a whole. Like the feather shield, Parmigianino's Madonna of the earthly globe is a design shaped to a format. The Virgin's head reaches to the very top of the painting. Her form spreads downward across the composition's lower boundary as the Christ child's body extends from one edge to the other. The crossing of limbs that's produced by the offering of the rose draws attention to the picture's center, and that center of the picture, if you were to draw an X from it from the angles, is exactly marked by the Virgin's left nipple. The rose is probably a damask rose, a hybridization produced in what Europeans then called Asia Minor, present-day Turkey, and distributed throughout the Near East and Middle East, then brought to Europe by crusaders in the 12th and 13th centuries and christened with the Damascus provenance. So this is a flower that grew out of a history of mixing and migration. The Virgin gazes down at the flower and through the flower toward the globe under Christ's hand. If the figures are obviously moving and yet somehow still, the globe is obviously still. It's a cartographic exhibit, and yet it has a swirling quality. One feels the energy that animates it as a cosmic body. It seems to want to rotate on its axis. Here is a world map, probably designed by Hans Holbein. And it shows some of the New World here, these large islands at the left. Oh, sorry. I didn't realize I don't have a pointer for a moment. You see the large islands at the left, one of which is named America or New Land. And then just to the left of those islands is the island of Japan. One notable feature of this map, it's been commented on quite a bit, are the two angels at the North and South poles shown turning cranks to make the globe spin. And it's an interesting idea, not at all common at this date, and odd. Copernicus was to publish his theory about that over a decade later. Some have suggested that maybe his ideas were circulating, really making the rounds at this point. In Parmigianino's painting, the Earth's axis is delicately but unambiguously marked by the placing of Christ's pinky on the North Pole. That observation about the pinky landing on the North Pole I owe to the artist Robert Smithson, a great fan of Parmigianino, who saw the artist as a contemporary guide to the dislocation of a human-centered view of the world and of history. So a little bit of contextualization about Parmigianino. I know there are some people here for whom Parmigianino is quite important, but maybe not everyone knows about his life and career. Here is a self-portrait he made in his early 20s, where we see Parmigianino drawing himself as he looks in a convex mirror. So his hands are switched. It looks like his right hand is floating forward, that's his left. His right hand is making the drawing. It's unusually and interestingly painted on a poplar panel that was turned so as to make the surface of the painting convex, like the mirror whose reflection it records. And this may be the first time this unusual self-portrait in a convex mirror has been projected on a concave surface. What does it look like? Does it look normal? The decision to record everything captured in the mirror as it appears in the mirror results in many surprising things. I'll just mention one, that stray yellow streak at right, which is the reflection of the gold mirror frame in the mirror itself. So he could do experiments like this. This was sort of his calling card when he arrived in Rome in 1524. But he had many, many sides to him. He was a stark realist when he wanted to be. There's many, many drawings by Parmigianino, many of them like this, a self-portrait holding up his pregnant dog. He was also a devoted student of art, picking up on the latest developments in art and then absorbing them and then doing something that has never been seen before. Here he is in Rome in the 1520s, making a copy after Raphael's School of Athens, painted about 10, 12 years earlier. Or more likely, he's making a drawing after a drawing that Raphael made in preparation for the fresco. He probably had access to things like that. On the back of the sketch are interesting sketches that have never been figured out. We have a sort of river god-like figure who's reclining and seems to be looking down at two spherical, circular forms, one of them that looks a lot like a medicine wheel. I don't think that's what it is, though. And another that looks like an armillary sphere, in other words, a three-dimensional model of the cosmos. And then on the other side of the page, there, I think it's pretty clear that we're looking up into a cupola. You can see the ribs coming together in the oculus and figures arrayed around where the cupola meets the drum, the outside of the circle. No one knows what that's for. Here is a late self-portrait in front of a couple of figures for a project that he had a lot of trouble finishing. He was given to alchemical studies, and according to his first biographer, Giorgio Vasari, he died at the age of 37 as a result of repeated and hazardous experiments with mercury. The emphasis on pattern and rhythm that we've been looking at, and the paradox of movement in stillness are enhanced by the painting's emphatic closure and the resulting impression of all-over ornamentation. In Smithson's words, the world of Parmigianino seems to verge on asphyxiation. There is no outside here. The figures reach to the edge of the picture field, turning gyrating draperies into a sort of ground for pearlescent bodies. The resulting impression is that this is not an excerpt of our world, not even a scene in the earthly life of Mary and Jesus. The ornamental emphasis is a clear no to the previous 100 or so years of paintings that depicted worldly spaces. So I'll just show a couple of paintings that he would have grown up with. One by Cima da Conegliano, a very innovative painting showing the Virgin and Saints outdoors among ruins. But as you can see, they're placed in a world that's completely intelligible in terms of a world we might inhabit. And closer to Parmigianino, the one that really imprints him in his earliest years is Correggio. And you can see here, we're in the 16th century, so figures are starting to fill the picture surface in a way that would lead to things like Parmigianino, but still, we can understand this as a world that behaves like the world that we know. They're outdoors, somebody set up a tent-like structure, there's a landscape behind. The painting by Parmigianino is, you could say, a callback to an earlier mode of Christian ars sacra, based in the principle that all aspects of a sacred work, both what we call ornament and what we call figuration, participate in its sacred meaning, just as all elements of creation participate in God's design. These figures do not inhabit a world that behaves like our world. We have instead a series of embeddings or encrustations, settings in the jeweler's sense rather than in the perspectival sense. Beginning at the center of the painting, the Virgin's golden sash carries at its center a large crystal, receiving light from all sides, an embedding that is repeated throughout the painting. The scintillating turning form of the Virgin shimmers against the backing of wine-red draperies, and in turn, she becomes the setting for the body of the child. The earth is nestled in turn against the white body of the child, which is in turn set against the virgin foil. You get the idea. So the earth here is a gem of creation, or it's a cosmic toy under the playful and delicate hand of a child God who seems to know exactly what he's going to do with it. So we've observed the combination of movement and stillness, the sense of an all-over ornamental quality in the picture, and that inevitably brings us to scale. If the figures are not in a room, but rather form part of an ornamental pattern, suddenly we realize that scale is completely open to question. The globe under the child's hand could be a mere model of the earth, like a small globe a scholar might keep in his study, such as in this painting, where you have a rather melancholic scholar, hazard of the profession, next to a desk with some books, a pen, and a globe. And the cartographers here, if you can figure out what that globe is showing, I would be very happy, and so would a number of other people. So the globe in Parmigianino's painting could be like that. I mean, roughly in terms of proportion, it's about that size in the two pictures. Or perhaps what we see in Parmigianino is not a desk globe, but not a model of the earth, but the earth itself, a vision of the planet presented to those who live on the planet, a dislocating vision. Our Earth is a cosmic body under the hand of its maker, as the Virgin, his throne and support, looks on in decorous subordination. And then there's a further twist in talking about these scale issues. Even as scale is dislocated within the picture and in its relation to us, the figures are actually very close to life size. If you were to walk up to that picture in the gallery and put your hand up to the hand of the Virgin, which comes very close to the picture plane, they would more or less match, although hers would be probably more elegant. So in one way, the painting is saying it's consistent with our world, and in another way, it's saying it is not. And that produces a disorienting effect. So what looks at first like a perfumed, sticky, and disorienting scene emerges as a cosmic, or rather cosmogonic, image, an insight into creation, or rather a final unfolding of the fullness of creation into the visible. But whatever it has to say about the origin of worlds and the origin of our world, there is something present tense about what we see here. The painting captures the sense of a gathering excitement that is now coming to a head. Everything is in transformation. For natural philosophers at the time, coral hovered between the categories of mineral, vegetal, and animal, and so the coral beads on Christ's wrist are a succession of potential worlds, as yet unrealized worlds following one another around this snowy wrist, repeating into circular infinity right next to the fully realized earth of creation, the dwelling populated by God's fallen humans, may be a first draft of creation, soon to be understood and made visible in its full rotundity. Now, you may well be asking, what brought this painting about? And it turns out we know a little bit about that. He made it on spec, but he intended it for the Pope, Pope Clement VII, and he made it for the Pope because the Pope was coming to Bologna, where Parmigianino was living at the time. He was coming to Bologna for an important meeting with possibly the most powerful human on earth at that point, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, the one in charge of an expanding Spanish empire, having made recent conquests in Mexico and Peru, as well as North Africa and Asia. So Pope and Emperor are meeting in Bologna, and Parmigianino makes this painting for the Pope. So let's put that briefly in context. Here is a drawing made by an artist traveling in the retinue of the Pope, Sebastiano del Piombo. He travels to Bologna with the Pope and he makes the drawing. It looks official, probably preparatory for a painting that would have commemorated the event, though as far as we know, the painting was never made. So what we see in the drawing is a debate, or at least a discussion, and it's focused on a terrestrial globe. You see instruments of the cartographer's art, a compass, a right triangle. They're in use or ready to be used. They insist on the technology, the craft that went into the construction of the globe that is now being presented and animatedly explained by a cosmographer. And it's definitely the center of attention. The Pope points to the globe from the facing side, even as the Emperor, his hand on his chest, his mouth open, he's in mid-speech, is shown in the act of offering his own opinion about what is going on in the world. And in 1530, there was a lot of news to discuss. There was the war with the Turks spreading into northern Africa. There was also the momentous development of the Christian empire's global expansion over the previous decades. Columbus and Vespucci sailing west and landing in hitherto unknown reaches of the earth's inhabited lands. The Portuguese king's wildly successful expeditions around Africa and on to the further known lands of Asia and islands beyond India, Cortes's conquest, as they called it, of Mexico 500 years ago, 1520, 21, and then making it possible that it could all be tied together, potentially, the complete circumnavigation of the globe by Magellan's crew in 1521-22, a huge news event at the time, equivalent to the moonshot 50 years ago for us. So here is what the world looked like, maybe something like what was shown on that globe. This is a pamphlet really made under the auspices of the emperor, and it's meant to show the world as he wanted it. So they had the problem of dividing the world between Portugal and Spain. That's what they thought was necessary to do. And so on the left, you have the hemisphere that belongs to the Portuguese, and on the right, the hemisphere that belongs to the Spaniards. Just a little bit of looking at this together. I wish I could point, but at the top of the hemisphere belonging to the Spanish, you see the word Gallia. That's not a reference to France. It's really connected to the M-O-N on the other hemisphere. So Mongolia, Mongolia. And then you see Bergia, that corresponds to the Bargu in Asia, discovered and described by Marco Polo. Marco Polo also describes an Asian region called Tamaco, which you see there. And then you get into the names that Cortés used for Mexico, Culhuacan, here Colhuacatia, and so on. And then you have America really at the easternmost extreme of this landmass. It doesn't name the whole thing, it just names a region understood as some kind of extremity of Asia. So we would be located somewhere around the A of Mongolia, right here. This geocultural formation is the subject of a book that I have been writing with my colleague Elizabeth Horodowich at New Mexico State University. It's entitled Amerasia, and we're hoping it comes out next year. This is a map of the Gulf of Mexico and of Tenochtitlan made shortly after the Cortés invasion. And you will notice this is again one of those south-oriented maps. So we're looking southward towards the top. And that point at the left, not the point, rather, the sort of right-angled peninsula is called La Florida. So that's to orient you a little bit. This is the Gulf of Mexico. And do you see just at the right edge, sort of where Mexico would be, it says Tamaco. Tamaco Provincia. So the idea that this is connected to Asia is present for Cortés and for many of the people who learned about what he was doing. Then these are not connected. These are two separate maps. Then we have a kind of close-up view of the amazing city of Tenochtitlan with its various waterways. The reports about this sort of encounter revealed a new world of cities and civilizations, not just island people with their canoes, but civilizations that built pyramids and such things. A Venetian ambassador to Spain, writing back to the Venetian authorities about these amazing developments, reported that Cortés had come to capitals such as Tenochtitlan and found highly sophisticated architecture, civilized people who dressed in beautiful clothes and had a great deal of gold that they didn't use for money, instead using it for ornamental purposes, and who did not use letters, he says, but instead wrote figures of animals and other things like the ancient Egyptians. So there's the idea of other worlds never before known and now encountered for the first time. That's one kind of possible world. And there is the idea that those other worlds make this world as a whole different. That realization that the whole world is new opens possible worlds as well. In 1516, the English scholar Thomas More told a story about one navigator who was part of Vespucci's crew and got left behind in Brazil, and who then wandered westward from Brazil until he discovered an island on the other side of the world where they spoke a language not far from Persian, an island named Utopia, where the social and political structures overturn European ideas about almost everything. No private possessions, no money or commerce, free food and hospitals, toleration of all religions, etc. So putting Europe in Utopia's mirror, More turns a withering gaze on the corruption and greed of the English society that surrounded him. He was unsparing in his description of his own society. So the report from another world prompts the reflection that things don't have to be this way. And few people have ever been clearer than More about what things not having to be this way might mean. In his book, it is said clearly, it does not have to be run by rich people who misshape the laws of the land to their material advantage. And then there is the amazing and real-life story of one 16th century Italian miller named Menocchio. Maybe some of you have read his story, who, when he read of encounters in faraway islands where some lived in one way and some in another, and some believe in one way and some in another, found himself questioning the entire edifice of Christian authority. Just reading about encounters with other worlds ushered this relatively uneducated miller into a new mental universe where Christian Europe, his own world, was just another place where people lived in a certain way and believed certain things. And for this questioning and reimagining of his own world, he was burnt at the stake in 1599. What we know about him is from the records of his Inquisition trial, which were beautifully studied in Carlo Ginzburg's book, The Cheese and the Worms, which, if you haven't read, I recommend. This was a time for radical questioning, and no development raised more basic questions about the world under one's feet than the sudden arising of worlds. So New World encounters can be compared to the ventures of the space age, the era that produced this highly optimistic domed structure. But I'd say the New World encounters were way more dislocating. Scientists make sure they have everything mapped before sending rockets to the moon or to Mars. If the space age had sent ships, to uncharted regions of space, encountered an unexpected planet populated by inhabitants with their own cities and societies, then went about trying to conquer them, provoking an existential crisis in a number of them about how we live in this world, then it would be something like what happened in the 16th century. If we get reports about there having been water on Mars at one time, we tune in, we find it interesting, and then we return to our daily lives. But every single day in 2022, we're dealing with the consequences of the global unsettlement that happened 500 years ago. In Parmigianino's Madonna of the Earthly Globe, the marbled world pivots under the little finger of its creator, unsettling scale without resetting it. The known world faces us, and the as yet barely known hemisphere on the other side is nestled against the child's body, a kind of arcane knowledge. The child's unnerving gaze suggests that full disclosure is imminent, and that this will be no mere addition to existing knowledge, but something like the opening of a seal, upending what humans thought they knew about the world they lived in. Without resolving it, the painting poses a basic question Christian Europeans were asking about the reshaping of the world. Why is this happening now? Why is the world being revealed in its entirety in our times? And rather suddenly, why is it being revealed, as they believed, by Christians, for Christians, who are seemingly compelled to push outward into new worlds that might be the oldest worlds, and then putting them together imaginatively in maps and images of the world? According to a prominent preacher in Rome at the time, Egidio da Viterbo, this was nothing less than a winding up of human history. He said, shortly after the death of Christ, so 1500 years earlier for him, the apostles had conquered a small part of the world for Christianity. But now, right now, he's Parmigianino's contemporary, Christians traveling eastward and westward are on the brink of conquering it in its entirety. In the 10th and final age, he said, the one we're inhabiting, all secrets will be revealed. And he says, those of the divine and eternal world will be revealed through the Kabbalah, and those of the created world by these voyages of discovery. Christianity, even official Christianity, was much more woo-woo before the Inquisition got going. We sense the momentousness, the imminence of potential revelation in the knowing and unnerving gaze of the child of ice, as Smithson called him. The new world, the painting suggests, is not this or that newly discovered expanse of land, but this ball we stand on, now being reconfigured as a whole, or just spinning to its end. Thank you. I don't know if people have questions. I'm happy to have a little discussion if you'd like. I don't know if there's microphones that need to come for the people attending online.
Thank you.
It would be great to bring up the lights so that I could see who is talking. Thanks.
My one question was, with respect to the painting, how many copies are there? And is the globe kind of given the same treatment in each of the copies? Or did successive artists improvise a bit?
It's a
because
good
they would have
question.
done it
I don't know of other copies, but that would be
Okay.
the question to ask. Yeah.
Oh, okay, thank you.
I mean, there are prints after it, and the prints are voluble in a way that the painting isn't, and they kind of confirm let's call it global interpretation of the painting. But that's like another sort of an extension of the paper. I have the print on the PowerPoint. I can show it if you'd like. Yes, Eve in the back.
Who and why was the title of, who changed the title of the painting and why?
That's a good question. I don't know when the first naming of it as the Madonna of the Rose was. I think it was in the 17th century. And it makes sense as part of a general move that you see in other parts of the culture. By the 17th century, a painting like this was part of the history of art, right? It was an aesthetic object. Whereas in 1530, it would have been seen, I think, at least in terms of some of the questions that I raised about it. So, you know, a cosmic view of it gets supplanted by a more, I don't know, normalizing view of it, if you will. And then in the 18th century, it went even further, and you get theories that it began as a Venus and Cupid, and then was dressed up as a virgin and child, because in 18th century eyes, it just looked like there's no way this could have been a Christian painting.
Would the artist have titled the painting originally?
No.
No.
No. It's pretty unusual to title paintings in this period.
Thank you.
Normally, paintings in this period have subjects, known subjects like the Virgin, Christ child, saints, subjects, whatever it might be. And for paintings that defied subject matter because they were being made, it's part of what's going on, what you get is descriptions. The first titles, if you will, come out of descriptions. So Giorgione's Tempesta, we call it that because the first known description of it calls it a tempesta with the soldier and the gypsy, because he didn't know what it was.
Hi, I forget the title that you used for the 15 pieces pre-Cortez that existed.
I'm talking about manuscripts. I'm talking about manuscripts that contain knowledge about, about any number of things.
Right. Are we confident that there isn't more manuscripts or globes or cartographic records, for that matter, that are in private collections like the Vatican's or
Well, I know a lot of scholars who would be pretty excited to find. This is a very active field, and if there was a discovery of a new pre-Cortez manuscript, that would make waves. So you'll hear about it if it happens. Yeah, if only.
Hi, was that painting stolen in the past?
Sorry, the Parmigianino painting?
Yeah.
No?
Well, it looks like...
you mean why didn't the Pope keep it?
No. I was just saying, was it...
He didn't, it's true.
No, it's just like, was it stolen? Like taken from...
Oh, no, it was... so the provenance, roughly, of the painting is offered to the Pope.
Right.
For some reason, he didn't take it. It stayed in... sorry, go ahead.
It looks like it was stolen and curled up.
Oh, no.
No.
It stayed in Bologna. It was in the palace of one of the noble families of Bologna through the 17th and into the 18th century, and then it got sold, and that's how it ended up in Dresden. So it didn't move around that much. In fact, interestingly, one could go on and on, really. This could have been 2 hours. In the same palace where it was kept, the Zani family palace in Bologna, also was one of the 15 manuscripts, the so-called Codex Cosby, an amazing thing. I've looked at it myself. In the same collection, it was given the title Book from China, interestingly, by its Bolognese owners. And so I like to think that, whoever it was that was the head of the household at any given time for those almost 2 centuries that it was in Bologna, saw the Mishtek manuscript and the painting in some relation to one another. In other words, they would have known that the manuscript came from that part of the world that the Christ child is keeping close to his chest. Yeah.
Hi, Alex, thanks. A couple of things, I guess. One is I wanted to be clear on the conclusion here with regards to the shield, the original that you showed.
Yeah.
If the feeling was that concentric rings at the bottom of the shield was in fact like an intimation that this is a new possible world that this artist at that time was thinking about because, with the discovery of Cortez. Secondly, and this is just a shorter question, is if there was any significance to why the North Pole having the pinky on it.
Yeah.
Why it was the pinky and not maybe the index, which is that sort of index creation finger, and there are things about it.
Well, so on the first question, when Pope and Emperor meet, all sorts of things arrive for presentation to them. Not Parmigianino's painting would have been an oddity probably, but what they were getting shown to them, and we have records about it, were things like that shield. Not that particular shield, that would have probably come earlier, but the Codex Cosby arrived in 1530 or 1533. Another summit between Pope and Emperor happened in 1533 in Bologna. One or the other of those, saw the arrival of that manuscript, but there were other things like that that were being shown and presented really as I said, trophies of Christian conquest. Look what we've done. Look at these amazing things that have come back from these places. So I think we know that Dürer was shown Cortesian objects and was amazed and staggered by them and has interesting things to say about the genius of those artists that made these things. And I have to believe that Parmigianino was shown these objects in Bologna. I mean, that he had a Dürer-like encounter. We just don't have his response the way we do have Dürer's journal. So I feel quite certain that they would have made a huge impact on Parmigianino. I don't know if it's informing this painting. What is informing this painting, definitely, without question, is all the news and, the new globes and maps showing the news about the new lands. That's definitely being processed through this painting. But he's not doing it in a kind of, news of the day approach. He's taking it into a kind of higher level eschatological, cosmological interpretation. Sorry if that's not concrete enough about the shield. We just don't know. And then the pinky, well, those are the impenetrable regions of artistic making. I don't know.
Alex, we have a question from the live stream, if you'd like to answer that.
I would.
There was a contemporary German encyclopedia that considered all had been found out about the world. Is this the sensibility of the painting, encapsulating everything about the world in one spot?
Thank you for that question. There is a lot of that beginning to happen in this period. I don't really set Parmigianino into that encyclopedic sensibility, which is highly cumulative sensibility or aesthetic, showing lots of different things. That's not his mode. He's, as you can see, he's a maker of highly unusual but highly cohesive compositions. He's making new art. He's not just exhibiting. So I feel like there's a cultural context that's one provides for the other, but I wouldn't see it as quite in that line. But I'm happy to hear from the questioner or other people a contrary view. I think that's a real debate. Yes.
Two questions.
Oh, sorry.
One is on the
Yeah.
left as we see it. There appears to be another painting in the background. Has anyone determined the significance of that?
Where?
On the Virgin's right shoulder.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So in preparation for this lecture, I put out a call on Facebook. Is anyone in Dresden? Because I wasn't satisfied with the high resolution image that the museum had sent me. And I felt that even just a photo from a phone directly in front of the painting would be better in some ways. And so I showed you some of those images that came from a friendly colleague in Dresden just a month ago or so. And I'm afraid those are reflections in the glass in front of the painting. I was wondering about that too for a moment. But no, the painting is strangely space-free. if you know what I mean. It's just draperies, barely a sense of maybe a bedclothes in the left, sort of on the left side of it, but really, it doesn't have a setting.
Okay, the second question. The Christ child is sort of treating this globe as a toy. Could that be seen as the church saying, the world is ours, we can do with it whatever we feel like?
Well, I would like to believe, I have no particular evidence for this, but just my sense of Parmigianino is that he's saying to the Pope, actually, you're not really the one in charge. There are powers that are beyond comprehension that will reveal things that we all will have to wait for. Do you understand? I think he's putting temporal power in its place in a painting like this. Even the temporal power of the church. That's my sense.
Maybe that's why he didn't buy it.
Exactly, could well be.
I have a very specific question.
Yeah. I think the mic is not picking you up. I can hear you, but for the purpose of, it's doing that thing again. That other one works very well. Here it comes.
Thank you. Working? Yes. So as I say, this may just be me and my interpretation of a very specific thing, but the baby Jesus's actual hand looked rather strange.
Could we have the image? I mean, why not?
Yes, thank you.
Is that possible, Aliyah? Oh, do I have it? Yeah, okay.
If you look at that hand, those fingers, the shape of the fingers, the nails, and so on.
Yes.
It almost looks reptilian. It almost looks like a foot in some ways. I mean,
yes.
Now, and yet the other aspects of the painting don't seem to represent an artist who would draw a human hand in quite that way. So is this normal for the artist? Is it just as me interpreting that as a rather strange hand? Or does it have any significance at all?
I was also given pause by that hand. I rather than reptilian, I felt it was aquatic.
Yeah, yes, I take back, it's aquatic.
I mean, but of course, the people who know Parmigianino in the audience will immediately say, no. Parmigianino's hands are just very artificial. That's just, he just does hands in a particular way. They're impossibly elongated and they come to points and, they do things that normal hands don't do. And I agree, that's true. I don't see how that's contradictory to the artist being interested in and suggesting other than human possibilities for some of these forms. I think that's completely within his imaginative sort of ken. So I think you're seeing something. Yes, Ken. Let's get a microphone so everyone can enjoy, because I'm not sure people in the back will be able to hear you, or people online.
Alex, we're talking about artistic reaction to the discovery of the New World. I'm really interested in knowing or understanding, was the experience or the reaction different when Asian or countries with more established or religious expressions, are there comparisons or contrasts that we can make here in terms of how artists reacted when the voyages started coming back from Japan and Asia and India, as compared to the New World, where I think the point that I was getting from what you were saying is the indigenous cultures were dismissed very quickly, even though they had very advanced systems. So are there differences?
You're talking about differences in the way Europeans responded to them?
To the Asian, or when...
As opposed...
Yes, as opposed to the New World.
I understand. So a terminological point that I think is important is that in this period, New World was not limited to, it wasn't a monopoly of America. They talked about New World in Asia all the time. They talked about India as New World, the islands of Indonesia as New World, Japan as New World, so the New Worlds connected these places. But your question, of course, is, didn't they see differences? And well, there are very good descriptions of many of these places, and in that sense, they did see difference. On the other hand, there's just continual exchange in the descriptors and in the imagery used to present information about these places back in Europe. So the very concept of cannibalism, which became such a powerful way of imagining populations in Brazil and in the islands of the Gulf of Mexico, was actually borrowed by Columbus from descriptions that he had read of Asian islands with, human eating people on them. He, in a way, transplanted that idea to places like the Caribbean, and then later in Brazil, it became a big theme. Imagery developed out of the encounter with Tupi Indians in Brazil, got used to describe populations all over Asia. So yes and no is my answer. I think the traffic between the different New Worlds has been less understood. And so that's why we focused on it in our book.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
You referenced in your remarks the precise location of Madonna's nipple as being directly centered in the painting. Is that coincidental? Did the artist work in studies that would sort of give us a suggestion of how he was working through the image?
Yeah. Yes. So there are, I don't know if there's a Renaissance artist for whom we have more drawings than Parmigianino. And there are a number of studies for this. And interestingly, again, it would have been another half hour if I had gone into them, but interestingly, there's maybe 10 studies for this painting. None of them show the rose or the globe. They're all just manipulations of the Virgin and the Child. And so my view is that he was developing that composition for whatever purpose, and then he decided, no, I'm going to make this for the Pope. And that's when you start to get the symbolism coming in, the cosmic symbolism of the rose. The rose is a powerful cosmic symbol, and the globe comes in at a later stage, later than all the studies we have for the painting. But you were asking about an ornamental sense of things? Yeah. Yeah, the painting, the drawings are much looser, yeah.
Okay, wonderful. We have one more question from the live stream, and then I think this might be our last question to wrap up the Q&A, if everyone's okay with that. Okay, 2 questions. I'll do this one, and then we'll get that one, and it'll be the last.
Okay.
Okay. So the painting is a distillation of the artist's interpretation of what was going on in the world at the time versus a compilation.
Okay. Distillation of what was going on in the world. I would say a posing of the question of the ultimate implications of what's going on in the world, something like that. So not a reportage, not even a kind of condensed reading, but a posing of the ultimate consequences, implications of what was going on globally. That's how I would describe the painting. As opposed to something like the Sebastiano drawing that I showed you, which is really just reportage of a particular event that has, global implications. Was there another question in the dome? Yes.
Pardon me. This is going to ramble a little bit, possibly, but
that's okay.
Can we go back to sexual innuendo?
Yeah.
Which was sort of dismissed at the beginning. Christ's penis is oriented toward the Virgin's left hand.
Yeah.
Her index finger and second finger are spread, perhaps suggesting a vulva. He's offering a flower to the Virgin. And I'm wondering if all of that suggests what the critic was thinking about in terms of sexual innuendo and perhaps a deflowering of the Virgin and another type of conquering.
Yeah, that's no doubt what he was responding to.
Yeah,
no doubt. And what the scholars in the 18th century who thought this couldn't have been a Christian painting responded to.
Maybe that's why the Pope didn't take it.
Oh, no. Clement VII was okay with sexual innuendo. That couldn't have been the problem. But yeah, I'm sorry it came off as dismissing. I was really trying to work with it and then contextualize that sense that one has of that sort of thing in a broader way, not contradicting that quality in the painting, but just trying to be true to the painting's ambitions.
Thank you.
Judy, do you want to see the print or should I show it? Okay. So, by the way, not to keep you all night, but he made another portrait at the summit of the portrait of the emperor, and it also involves a globe, and it also really wants us to think about the other side of the globe where his hand is making a claim. So that's a whole other part that we could have gotten into. This is the Codex Cosby that arrived in Bologna, maybe at the same time as Parmigianino's painting arrived, before the eyes of the Pope. So I like to think of the Bolognese owner of these two objects, thinking about them together. And these are some very cool slides that my wife, Amelia Saul, made. You'll see that it says Libro del Mexico and Book of Mexico, and you'll see that it's a little bit strange the way it's written over something else. So originally it read Libro della Cina, and then that was partially erased. And so that's what it would have read originally. And then it was partially erased, not entirely, interestingly. They could have done it all the way, and then overwritten at a somewhat later date. This is the print. This is really hard for me to see, but it's a print of the later 16th century, which gives us a little bit of an interpretative context. So it puts it in the context of Isaiah 11, and the branch shall grow out of his roots, right? So I've put in blue the parts that at the top that are quoted underneath the image. And then if you just keep reading in Isaiah 11, you get into some interesting global ideas. And so to me, this print understands the painting roughly in the way I do. And to the question about when did the rose come into the title, maybe around here. So that's the, yeah. Okay, what other goodies do I have? Okay, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was really fascinating, a treat and an honor to have you here. I'm going to introduce Ken Bradley in a moment to come up and say a few words to provide our collective thanks to Dr. Nagel, after which you are all invited up to the third floor of the dome for some refreshments and and conversation. So please welcome Ken Bradley to the stage.
Well, as I was sitting here, I couldn't help but run through my mind lyrics from a wonderful song by Garfunkel. All I know, endings always come at last. They come too fast. They pass too slow. This is, as David had mentioned, this wonderful presentation by Alex, A Dream Come True for Me, does represent the conclusion of the public programs that were developed in support of the Everywhere We Are exhibition series. During the series, we were able to pay tribute to the heroic efforts of the men and women who participated in responding to the flood, which devastated many collections, including my own. We also were able to hear a wonderful presentation by Ocean Veritan from the University of Toronto that talked about the neuroscience of the aesthetic object. As well, we pay tribute to the conservators who, through their efforts, just do miraculous work in terms of saving works that otherwise would be lost. We also were able to pay tribute to one of our local artists, and also Wen Gilentz, who resides in London, Ontario. So all in all, the series was very important to me, and I think it was successful. But I really wanted the series to end with the presentation by Alex, who is kind of a hero to me. And I'll get into that a little bit more. This room has been very, very good to me, but it's also been very good and very important for more than for boys and girls, men and women, educators for the past 5 decades, who were invited to come here to explore and ponder worlds that were once reserved for the astronomers, philosophers, philosopher kings, theologians, science fiction writers. We almost lost this building, and through the heroic efforts of men and women, we were able to save this building, this wonderful, wonderful building, and it now has been repurposed, I think, for a new function that really could not be better suited to continue on the tradition of education and the world of exploration that allows us to understand the world around us. This time, though, we are invited to embark on through contemporary art. This time we are invited to embark on a journey of discovery where we learn about ourselves, the world, our human journey through time, but no longer through telescopes, but contemporary art. And I think most importantly, I think it allows us to experience what I think is the most wondrous blessing of all that is bestowed on all civilizations and cultures, and that is the role that artists play in helping us to understand the world that we live in. And I think tonight, Alex, it was so interesting to me just to hear, how we can take threads from the past and have them so relevant for for issues that we are confronted with today. So I particularly enjoyed that. I'm not a joiner by nature. And like the vast majority of people, I was a bystander during the fight to save this building. So if there's anyone in this room who fought the great fight that allowed us to continue to enjoy this room, and for future generations to continue to enjoy this room and this building, this time through the experience of contemporary art, my first thank you tonight must go to you. Without you, we would not be in this room tonight, so thank you. there are many people that I want to thank. David, you at the start thanked some of them, but I would like to personally again thank the curators from both the Nickel Galleries and Contemporary Calgary. Christine Sowiak, I believe, is here, and Ryan and David and Kanika, who I understand had her baby a couple of weeks ago, a little girl. So that's really wonderful news. I also want to thank the sponsors who provided the funding that allowed us not only to mount the exhibition, but to also have these public programs. When we started out with the exhibition, it was supposed to be, I think, a 9-month, 2-venue show, and it turned out to be 2.5 years. So it was, it called upon all of us to, be resilient and to undertake, last minute planning. But so to all of you who did that, you have my personal gratitude forever. So thank you. I also want to thank Dr. Gobin for your wonderful introduction to Alex. I can hardly wait. I've ordered your book on representations of the criminal body in 17th century Dutch Republic. It sounds gruesome, but at the same time really fascinating. But your introduction to Alex was wonderful, so thank you so much for doing that. What very few of you would know in this room is that the Everywhere We Are exhibition was actually dedicated to another hero of mine, a boyhood hero of mine, Harold Innis, who was an important academic at the University of Toronto, who championed the importance of having a uniquely Canadian academic perspective on issues that were important to Canada. His was a generation before Marshall McLuhan, Northrop Frye, Donald Creighton, some of the other luminaries that are maybe perhaps better known. When in part one, the dedication was a very public dedication because of his obvious affiliation with academia. For the part two, it was a more private dedication, but Harold Innis really fundamental. I was in grade 7 when I first became exposed to his thinking, and it's a testament to the really, the importance of having really good teachers who are able to take very difficult concepts and Harold Innis is not easy reading, but was able to instill in grade 7 and grade 8 students an understanding, the basic understanding of his writings, which were about space and time, and that forever has influenced, I think, how I've approached collecting art. And so I do want to tonight say thank you to Harold Innis. The next person that I really must thank, because he's directly responsible for two things: for introducing me to Medieval Modern, which was a book that I had always hoped would be written, and it was Ryan who told me that the book existed, and it was Ryan who facilitated the discussion with Alex Nagel that resulted in his agreeing to come tonight to speak to us. So Ryan, are you here in the audience? I think you are. Ryan Sluggett, yes. Ryan, where are you? Can you stand up so we can clap? Ryan's one of our, yeah. Ryan is, one of our, born local and artists that we're really, really proud of. He's now, he's just recently moved from Los Angeles to New York State. So I want to thank you, Ryan, for introducing me to Medieval Modern and then for helping us have Alex here tonight. I guess what I find, I've been very lucky to be able to travel extensively and to go to Europe a lot, and my collection is contemporary art. But in my many travels to Europe, I was always seeing elements of medieval art and Renaissance art that I kind of could see were related to contemporary art, but I never had the construct, the intellectual construct, to kind of make it all make sense. So when Ryan over dinner mentioned that there was this book called Medieval Modern, I immediately ordered it, or Judy at Trepanier-Bear ordered it, and subsequently I think I've distributed about 30 copies of it, because when I like things, I like to share things. So, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful thing, because what it did was it connected all the dots, and I was able to kind of see, that we have this kind of continuum, and in that, humans, my experience having traveled is that humans around the world are very, very similar. And what's wonderful about art to me is that we see these incredibly important individuals we call artists, and they're just so very, very important to us. And they are able to, through their unique abilities, they're able to present the world and to interpret the world, but it's done through the lens of a human. And so for me, this continuum of art really, for me, connects my sense of humanness, that living in 2022, I'm connected to people that lived a long time ago, and I think will, connect me to those who will come after me. So for me, that is the great joy for what you have done, Alex, is that you've kind of presented this in an intellectual framework, and it's so meticulously chronicled. And I'll just give you a very quick example. When Alex arrived on Tuesday, we had dinner, and I was telling him a little bit about some of the artworks in the Everywhere We Are exhibition, and I mentioned Ron Terada's wonderful Jack paintings. And a text-based artist, and it provides a different way of looking at a portrait, and without missing a beat, Alex said to me, "Oh, that's just like Albrecht Dürer's Portrait of Erasmus in 1526, where he put on the painting, the better portrait will his writings show." So I just thought that was just so interesting, because I was trying to explain, how the Jack paintings reveal the image of a person in a more telling way than an actual image. And you were able to kind of link it right back to 1526. So it was wonderful. So I just want to thank you, Alex, for really enriching my life. I could not have imagined that we would ever be able to get you here, and you've been so gracious. We were up at the Nickel Galleries today, and Alex was so interested in many of the artists. He was at Contemporary Calgary yesterday, and just shows such a keen interest in looking at how works are exhibited, how they're displayed, interested in the arts, taking notes, taking lots of notes. I have this, I'd like to give this to you. It seems so small in comparison to how great you've enriched my life, but please accept this on behalf of all of the room. And the last thing I do want to say, and I meant to say it earlier, and that is when I was talking about saving this building, we have to fight for those of us who are interested in the visual arts. We actually have to fight. I was a bystander. I did not participate in saving this building, but because of others did, I have benefited greatly from their efforts. And so I would just encourage, on June 11th, there is an auction to raise funds for Contemporary Calgary. And there's some really wonderful works of art that you can look at on the lower level. And I just encourage you, if you are able, to participate that way. But we need to fight to keep our buildings and to improve our buildings and to improve the facilities that we have. We need exhibition spaces, and we need the public to come to the shows and to support the artists for the very, very important work that they do. And so, Alex, I'd like to give this to you and to thank you. Honestly, another gift. I can't believe it. No.
Thanks again to everyone.